drives right through the stop sign again. Report stop sign bug.
The transfer of class members out of U.S. custody. In other words, he's saying, who made this decision?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the
19, he was asked if he was a gang member. He said no. Garcia had been deemed a gang member by the Prince George's County Police Department in part because he was at the time wearing a Chicago Bulls hat and a hoodie, and a confidential informant claimed that Garcia was an active member of MS-13, although he denied that at the time.
And Pam Bondi, who 100% take it to the bank, knows every bit of that, just said that it's been proven he's part of it. She knows it's not true. She's lying because she doesn't give a damn about the law or the Constitution or the truth. She's a loyalist to Donald Trump. That's it. What she says has...
(527-0100) Coventry Direct, redefining insurance.
MSNBC Premium gives you early access and ad-free listening to Rachel Maddow's chart-topping series, MSNBC Original Podcasts, exclusive bonus content, and all of your favorite MSNBC shows now ad-free. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts. President Trump's first 100 days. Watch.
I'm going to be here 5 days a week again.
Read and listen.
Staying up half the night reading executive orders.
For this defining time in the second Trump presidency, stay with MSNBC.
Hi everyone, it's 4 o'clock in New York. It is without question Donald Trump's single biggest vulnerability right now, and the greatest threat to his standing even among his own voters and supporters. Remember, many Americans signed up for a wholesale disruption of the status quo and are not yet startled by the dismantling of federal agencies. Many of them wanted to turn the tables on some of our most trusted alliances, and many approve of more aggressive policies on immigration and deportations. But what no one, not a single voter, signed up for was an economy that is right now flashing red in a state of mortal danger. Just look at how the Dow closed today, down around 700 points. Related or not, just this afternoon, Jerome Powell, chair of the Federal Reserve, expressed some concern today, suggesting tariffs and the uncertainty surrounding their implementation could soon force the central bank to balance two somewhat conflicting goals: controlling inflation and supporting economic growth. The New York Times today adds a new layer to all this. Quote, economists and policymakers are still rubbing their eyes in wonder that an American president single-handedly threw the world into such economic turmoil and then celebrated. Consumer and business confidence has plunged. Uncertainty is paralyzing purchases, from a new home or car to a new factory. Investors have signaled their lack of faith in the U.S. economy by selling off treasury bonds. That's the traditional haven when the outlook darkens. Again, these developments aren't just a threat to the people of this country and our nation's general sense of self and well-being. They also happen to represent what could be the gravest threat to Donald Trump's political standing ever since he came down the escalator. Recent polling suggests Trump is underwater on the economy. 56% of Americans disapprove of his handling of it, just 44% approve. That's the top line. Look deeper. Top reports this, quote, even Trump's own voters are starting to express real concerns about his ability to bring down costs and manage the economy, an area that was once seen as a key strength of his, given his status as a quote-unquote businessman and candidate president. Echelon found that while 74% of Trump 2024 voters strongly approve of his immigration policies, just 53% of his voters strongly approve of his handling of the economy. Indeed, there are red flags for Trump lurking in every corner and crosstab of the echelon poll. Only 44% of voters approve of his handling of the economy, down 5 points since February. On tariffs, 55% of voters disapprove, up 6 points from February. A massive 70% of all voters now say they are concerned about tariffs. A measly 11% of voters say tariffs should be a top priority for the U.S. economy. A hilariously bad number for a key presidential priority. Today, those starved for signs of life from Trump's political opposition would be heartened to see what is actually happening, especially what California Governor Gavin Newsom announced, that he and his attorney general are suing the Trump administration in federal court over those sweeping tariffs. Watch.
We're asserting ourselves on behalf of 40 million Americans. And I imagine if you caucus those 40 million Americans, you'd find few. I don't care where they are. The largest tax increase in modern U.S. history.
That's where we start today. Most favorite experts, reporters from France. CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman is back. Also joining us, David Frum, staff writer for The Atlantic, host of the new video podcast, The David Frum Show. With me at the table, New York Times editorial board member, MSNBC political analyst Mara Gay's here. All right, Steve, I feel like everything through E.F. Hutton, I just dated myself forever, but what you say comes to pass, sometimes not in the next news cycle, but certainly by the next couple. And the economic underpinnings of what roiled the markets seem to have seeped into the minds of the voters and the people of this country, but perhaps more notably today, the Fed chair. Tell us what's on your radar.
So we got a 1-2 tariff punch to the market today. We began down sharply when NVIDIA, which you may know as one of the highest flyers of the 7 highest flying stocks we had, announced that it was going to take a very large charge because of a new restriction being put on the export of chips that it had designed to meet prior export restrictions. Well, the market didn't like that, and it traded down. And that went across the day until about 1:30, when Fed Chair Jay Powell gave a speech, and when he said, you know what, these tariffs put us in a particular pickle. We cannot cut rates to save the economy if there's a downturn or a recession, because the tariffs threaten inflation. And only when we are sure that the inflation is temporary can we come in and cut interest rates. Now, of course, this is a particular situation because the Fed usually doesn't have a dilemma between these two situations. When unemployment falls, inflation. When unemployment rises, inflation falls. So it really doesn't have a dilemma. Tariffs do both. They cause the economy to decline and growth to contract, and they cause higher inflation. So the Fed is saying to the markets, we can't help you out here, and the markets took another leg down. It was a really tough day in the markets because the Fed chair said, we can't help.
And you're always so good at tying what the market is reacting to what people will sort of eventually have to contend with. And I've been reading both the Times as well as some regional papers from around the country that used to be my job in the White House. And people are starting to apply local sort of needs and products to the global crisis that Trump has created. And people are starting to understand that things that are made here and things that are needed here to make things here are all in jeopardy.
I mean, that's right. And I mean, honestly, if the president had stopped for a second to think about any of this stuff, he almost certainly would have come up with a very different policy. But you can see, like when he first put tariffs on the auto companies, 3 days later he came out and he got rid of them, and then he said, well, no, the auto companies need a little more time. Then he put them back on, then he took them back off. It's really kind of very difficult for anybody to plan anything right now. But also, learning is just how reliant we are on the imports that we get. If we could have been making it here, we would have been making it here. But there's something I looked at, Nicole, which I think is instructive. There's a thing called raw metals, the making of steel. And there's also fabricated metals. There are 4 times more employees that are working with the raw metals and fabricating it than there are the people who are making the raw steel. So we get these things in, we make profit from it, and we sell it, and we make money. And that's why, I'm sorry, but contrary to what the president says, we're one of the richest countries in the world. We are not poor. Those other countries are not taking advantage of us. That's not what's happening right now. Sure, there are places where we could possibly have a better relationship, but the idea of blowing everything up and then saying, okay, we're going to negotiate it, well, you just get what you get. You know, you mess around and then you find out, and what we're finding out is that these trade relationships are very important to big companies, and I think what you just said, Nicole, is really significant, that individual Americans are finding out just how important these trade relationships are.
What is the posture of sort of the largest retailers in the country? I mean, my son plays travel baseball, so you go into lots of places, and Walmart is where if you forgot something you need, if you forgot a glove or a sock, they have that. If you need groceries, they have that. I mean, they can be sort of a beating heart of just about anywhere you go. These recognizable retailers that have everything on the shelves at affordable prices. What is the prospect for their ability to sustain prices and sustain supply?
Well, they're warning about all of that. They're warning that their profits may not be so high, or maybe lower than they had been. They're worried about the supply of things. It's interesting you use that word supply, Nicole, because what happened in the pandemic was what's called a supply shock. We couldn't get the stuff we needed. You stopped making cars because you couldn't make chips. And then the whole thing sort of cascades down, and then prices go up. This is going to be a supply shock. It's not like we can't live without these things and won't do okay, but what's going to happen is prices will go up or products won't be available. It's very indicative of what happened during the pandemic, and you have to brace for that. And it's quite remarkable. The pandemic was something that was created by nature and spread. This is something that is completely man-made. I always say, don't mess around, because the world will come at you with things you haven't thought were coming your way, and you'll have to react. If we had a problem right now in which we needed Europe, Japan, or any of our allies right now, how eager would they be to come to our rescue in the event? You remember the great financial crisis? All the central banks got together and worked together to save the global financial system. Would that happen now? I think there's great risk that it would.
David Frum, let me bring you in on that question. It also, Czarl boss, George W. Bush, he first convened Nancy Pelosi, then Senator Obama, then Senator McCain, and the country was able to speak sort of with one voice. Donald Trump and his cabinet do not speak with one voice. So it seems that the prospects of getting the world to row in our direction would be greatly hampered by the inability of the Trump administration to speak with one voice.
The United States has, since Donald Trump came to office, threatened to annex territory from NATO ally Denmark, has threatened to annex NATO ally Canada. I think Americans need to understand the alliances are over. The United States is alone, just the way Donald Trump wanted. Wait, not alone, El Salvador. The United States and El Salvador alone. Maybe Russia sometimes opportunistically. I think the reason all this is such a threat to the president is Donald Trump has promised. Donald Trump has led the United States into certainly the most severe economic hardship of the past 20 years. This may be as bad as the Great Recession, may be as bad as anything that anyone can remember. But he's promised at every turn, this is going to be easy. This is going to be cheap. Yes, we're bullying all our former friends. We're betraying people who betrayed Ukrainian soldiers in the field, but there will be no cost to America. But in fact, it's something that's going to be hugely expensive. So when he says to other countries, you don't have the cards because you're smaller and weaker, you say to the Canadians, you don't have the cards because you're smaller and weaker, and that is true. But people in Canada say, we will pay a price in order to retain our political independence, much as we like Americans. How much of a political price are Americans prepared to pay? How much of the price? And the answer is no price. No one thought they were signing up for this. The idea that there's going to be, by summer, I think, rising unemployment, prices are going to start rising very, very soon. No one signed up for this. Everyone was promised it would be easy. It's going to hurt, and for no reason at all.
David Frum, we started with the polling, which we don't often do around here, but it is this. But what's important is that even those same human beings disapprove of his handling of the economy, and 70% are not fans of the tariff scheme. Why do you think Trump is carrying out such politically unpopular things?
Because the idea of trade is premised on the idea that two human beings can sit down together, make an agreement, and both walk away better off. This is the world. He's a predator. He's a sexual predator. He's a predator in business. He's a predator in politics. The only way he knows he's done well is if the other person looks hurt. And if the other person is not hurt, then Donald Trump feels that he doesn't do well. So the whole idea of trade to him is a scam. He doesn't understand it because it rests on honest business, which he's never practiced in his life, or at least not since he went bust the first time in the late 80s. Right now, the United States economy is like, we're in a situation like that cartoon character who's off the edge of the cliff, embracing the anvil that has not yet begun to fall, or has just begun to fall. He's still wiggling his little feet. But very soon the fall begins, and then those numbers, as bad as they are, they get worse.
You know, Mara, I am guilty of this, so I'm not criticizing anyone for viewing things this way because I do it myself. I'm the cartoon character, right? Like, I know we are over the cliff, but I still think because of who we are, and because Steve continues to talk in calming tones to me about the economy and the markets, and because David's so smart and is still publishing, along with his colleagues at The Atlantic, literally the most biting, clear-eyed analysis of what's happening, I still think we can pull off the cliff. But in reality, that's an open question.
I actually have asked myself the same question. I mean, you walk by a postal carrier and you think to yourself, okay, thank God the postal office is still delivering the mail. How long is DOGE going to allow that to go on? And I think Americans are living with such an uncertainty. So are CEOs. There's a serious concern about whether they are continuing to invest, make new investments in the economy. There's concern about not just the tariffs, but Trump's erratic behavior and punishing behavior on American universities, which, by the way, are extraordinary sources of economic engines in many states, including Alabama, deep red states here. So I don't think that most Trump voters, not only did they not vote for this, I think it's becoming extremely clear that much like someone who maybe kind of was told a hurricane is coming, and then the hurricane isn't that bad, the next year they may stay in their home, and they think, well, we'll just ride it out. That was just everybody kind of overplayed their hand. It's not that serious. And then they lose their home, or God forbid, their life. This is what we're talking about, is I think Americans who thought, well, the first term, maybe it wasn't so bad for me the first time around. And now there's just a sense of shock and inertia. And I really am concerned for the economy, not only because of the tariffs, but just the deep uncertainty in consumer confidence. Yeah. All the way from that on Main Street to Wall Street. It is scary.
Yeah. I mean, Steve, speak to me about, I've heard this anecdotally from friends who was like, I never used to watch you because I didn't think it affected me, friends who worked in finance or banking. They said, but now I tune in a little bit just to see what's happening. I mean,
Welcome
much
to the show.
Yeah, right. Like how much are people realizing that what David is speaking to and what Mara is speaking to, which is really, really informed study of the man who is the country's president, has the ability, without being moored to norms, without being rooted in history, without understanding, I don't believe he understands the tragic history of tariffs. How much does the market change, or how much have economists changed, how much have business leaders changed, how they study him?
Well, I don't know if you remember, but we talked a little while ago about JP Morgan's recession call. They made a recession call based on the tariffs, but also based on a change in what they perceive to be their view as well as businesses' view of President Trump. The idea that the market, which is sending right now a really clear signal that it doesn't like what's going on, and that the president is not reacting, that is a huge change for the market's view of this president. I don't know that the public is having the same view, but look, you thought you were putting in the most business-friendly president in the history of America. He had billionaires around him. If he didn't care about anything, You would think he would care about the stock market. And what would that mean? It would mean you'd call a bunch of Wall Street economists and you'd say, look, I got a plan here. What do you think? And they'd say, Mr. President, you do this and I'm going to be marking down GDP. I'm going to be marking up inflation. I'm going to be raising my unemployment rate. All that stuff is just automatic. You put those numbers into the model and the model spits out really bad stuff. Now, what does this mean? Who cares about Wall Street? I get that Wall Street is owned in part, the stocks, by the top 1%. But let me tell you what happens when stocks decline and when profits decline. Companies move to restore profits and companies move to increase their stock price. Those two things are what companies are supposed to do. What does that mean in this context? It means they'll fire people, they'll reduce investment, and they'll do what they can in order to return to either profitability or to get their stock price back up. So, and by the way, 60% of the public own stocks. They may not own a lot of the stock market, but they may own in their savings maybe a lot of stocks in there. So it's a big issue, I think, for the public, and it's a big issue for corporations, and it's surprising that it's not a bigger issue for the president.
Sort of shocking, but not surprising. So we're surprising, but the new normal. Steve Leisman, thank you so much for starting us off today. It's great to see you. David and Mara, stick around with us. Writer Derek Thompson will join us as well after the break. Also ahead for us, ever since November, we've been asking, where is the fire in the belly of the opposition? The pro-democracy coalition, the Democrats. Well, there's a lot of it to show you today. They are rallying right now alongside Senator Bernie Sanders and Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, striving to keep up the fight against.
There's goods. You could get people to invest in factories in America to build things. And there's services. For example, you could get people who live in foreign countries to visit America and then spend money here in Manhattan, at Disney World, around the country. We are somehow pursuing a policy of America first to reindustrialize this country by cutting out both of those stool legs. We're not only making it impossible to invest in factories because it's absolutely unclear what the tariff rate's going to be on Thursday, much less a week from Thursday, much less a year from Thursday. So no one's going to build like a shoe factory or a nail factory in America if they don't know if the tariff rate's going to change in 24 hours or 24 years. But you also are turning away thousands, if not millions of people who want to give Americans their money. They live in France, they live in Canada, they live in Asia, but they're not coming to the U.S. because they're either afraid of being rounded up by deportation groups, or they simply don't like the political climate, and they say it doesn't sound like a lot of fun to be like marinating in like incipient autocracy if what we want to do is just like have a fun summer. So I think it's really important to even before you get to the morals here of what Trump is doing to our institutions, just the sheer bottom line economics of trying to bring money into this country by rejecting foreign tourists and making it harder for people to invest in this country is just about the worst possible way you could go about it.
David Frum, do you think something has changed? I mean, do you think that from Trump 1.0, where he played a person who his supporters believed was at least playing a role of being interested in the forgotten men and women, do you think he's dropped that charade, or do you think something else changed?
Well, a lot of the terrible things that are happening now did happen then, just in smaller degrees. Trump, in his first term, didn't work as hard, didn't know what he was doing, and wasn't surrounded by people willing to help him. But look, before Donald Trump became president, the United States was the world's largest producer and exporter of soybeans. In 2018, that is a year and a half into his first presidency, Trump starts a trade war with China. And the result is the Americans' sales of soybeans to China collapse. Since Trump's first presidency, Brazil has overtaken the United States as the world's leading producer and exporter of soybeans. Brazil today is producing about twice as much as the United States. But a lot of the harm he did that first term was distracted from by the advent of COVID. Things were getting bad in 2019. Trump was engaged in a trade war with China. One of the reasons he neglected COVID so seriously at the end of 2019 was because he was looking for an exit. He was flattering Xi, saying, "You're doing a great job, you're so wonderful, you're so great," because he was hoping Xi would give him President Xi of China would give him a face-saving exit from the trade war that he'd started and was losing. And then COVID came along, and Americans basically gave Trump a pass and said, "Okay, the whole world economy has collapsed. We're not blaming you for or even remembering the bad things you did in 2018 and 19. But the tariffs of those years were much smaller and much less broadly phased than the tariffs of today. But he did attack then. It was the same principle. Don't just concentrate on China, attack allies too. He applied tariffs to Canadian steel and aluminum, to European steel and aluminum. He was a protectionist all along. It's just now he's working harder and is surrounded by enablers rather than people say, "What are you doing, you lunatic?"
Well, so if "what are you doing, you lunatic" is never to be uttered, where does this end, David?
It ends probably with a recession. It ends with probably the next Congress trying to remove some of the tariff authority from Donald Trump's hands, and they may or may not be successful. Remember, he gets to veto. If they pass a law removing tariff authority, Trump gets a veto, so you need enough members of Congress to override the veto. It ends probably with the next president, should there be free and fair elections, the next president rolling back some of this. But it also ends with everyone in the world remembering that the United States did this. It remembers with NATO allies saying, we don't want to buy American weapons, even though they're the best, because we don't need weapons that are better than the Americans. We need weapons only that are better than the Russian weapons. And Swedish and Chinese and French weapons will be good enough, and we can trust them not to be turned off if the Americans elect another president like Donald Trump. You know, after Trump won, there was an opportunity for the United States to the world and say, look, we swear to you, we will never, ever, ever mix tequila and Quaaludes ever again. And then mean it. But the second time your protector and ally and customer mixes the tequila and Quaaludes, you think, this is beginning to look like a habit.
Yeah. I mean, Derek, the tequila and Quaaludes got me to your great reporting about takeout meals on the counter. I don't know how. I think that was a Mexican restaurant. I don't know. Probably too much about the inner workings of my synapses. But what is sort of the Venn diagram, though, of people for whom the COVID PTSD, the sort of retreating into their own lives, into their own cocoons, made Trump seem like a good idea, and the reality being sort of smacked in? I mean, 70% of all voters, that's at least 30% of those were Trump voters, just mathematically. What will be the intersection of people who were sort of carrying out this global trend of post-pandemic discontent with the status quo, and people who are sort of ripe to if David's best case scenario, which was hard to discern in there, but it was in there, are to reject him in a midterm or in the next election. How much of that is sort of ripe for the picking for Democrats or the opposition?
Yeah, when I think about why did Americans mix the Quaaludes and tequila a second time, I think there's actually several different camps of Trump voter, right? There were some people who really wanted to punish progressives, who really wanted a fighter in the White House, who would essentially use his executive power to enact a kind of war against progressive ideology across government and across society. And unfortunately, you have to admit that that is exactly what Trump is doing. He's not just attacking progressive ideology within government, he is attacking universities, he's attacking science, he is attacking law firms, he's attacking any part of society over which the executive office has any kind of contact. And so you could say for those groups, they still like what's happening with Donald Trump, and they might make up a plurality of the, say, 37% still approve of the job the president is doing on the economy. But there's also a lot of people who I think voted for Donald Trump a second time because they didn't think that his policies would affect their life. They voted essentially for chaos, almost as entertainment. And this brings me back to the cover story that I wrote that you mentioned, the antisocial century. There's this Danish political scientist named Michael Bang-Petersen, who does a lot of research about why people on the internet tend to like conspiracy theories, whether they're from the left or the right. They don't even care as long as the conspiracy theory is good and it's trying to bring down elites. And he came up with this term that he called need for chaos. Some voters have a need for chaos, and they marshal their vote. They execute their ballot authority by voting for the candidate they think will simply create the most fun, will do the most chaos, and it will hopefully affect other people and not them. And to David's point, I think we're about to find out just how much those folks are going to be affected by these tariffs. Costs are going to go up, not just on smartphones, not just on electronics. 97% of the toasters that we import come from China. 99% of the child safety seats that we import come from China. 70% of the toys we import for children under 12 come from China. There is nowhere for those prices to go but straight up to the moon. Families will notice, the economy will notice, and that very well may be the pressure that forces Trump to back down from this trade war.
So, I mean, you guys, need for chaos. I wrote that down. Tequila and Quaaludes with a big X through it. I wrote that down. David Frum, thank you for that. I'll hold on to it forever. There's a new episode of the David Frum Show out today. Don't leave just yet, but as soon as we're done here, go watch that wherever you get your podcasts. Up next, another packed crowd for the two Democrats who seem to be the most effective right now at energizing all sorts of voters in massive crowds lately. Many red states in the process. Last night, they were in Folsom, California. They spoke to a crowd of over 30,000 people. Now, just to put that in context, the population of Folsom is 80,000 people. It's a smallish town outside of Sacramento, California. Senator Bernie Sanders is currently speaking to a capacity crowd of 7,500 attendees with another 1,500 attendees, part of an overflow area outside, according to Sanders' communications director. This past Sunday, the group brought out 20,000 people in Salt Lake City, Utah. Following day in Nampa, Idaho, more than 12,000 people showed up. And as the duo go into deep red Republican states and congressional districts, they're reminding the voters there, who are not their constituents, that they are the ones talking to voters, not their own elected representatives. Here's Bernie Sanders calling out California Republican David Vallado at a separate rally yesterday in Bakersfield.
I come from the state of Vermont, and I'm here in Bakersfield. Alexandria comes from New York, and she is here in Bakersfield. Now, Mr. Congressman, you live in this district. Why don't you show up at a town meeting like this?
It's a perfectly good question. Why don't you? Now, there are some elected Republicans who are having town hall events, none of them that big. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who asked attendees to present their IDs in order to prove they live in her district. Security spent much of the event removing anybody who protested or spoke out, even tasing two attendees. Joining our coverage is chief political columnist, host of the In Politic podcast for Puck, MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilman, joins Harmony Gang. David Amaro is still here. John Heilman, what do you think of the AOC Bernie tour?
Well, first of all, I think tequila and Quaaludes sounds pretty good. Is that what's on the menu? Is that what's on the menu today?
This is a great line. It was on the menu in the 8 week. I kept you separate from the Quaaludes conversation on purpose. It's over. We have taken a break, and we are now back with Bernie and AOC.
Tequila and Quaaludes are never over for me, Nicole, in no Negrata fashion. What do I think? I think it's you know, I followed Bernie Sanders around on the campaign trail with the circus in 2015 and 2016, and I have charted and tracked his progress ever since. And it's the reality that part of the thing that makes Bernie Sanders so compelling to a lot of people is that he has been so consistent throughout that entire time. The man has a consistent set of core beliefs. He has stuck to them. He speaks too long. He's not a conventional politician. He's, you know, now an 83-year-old man who has that Larry David kind of yelling at you and lecturing to you kind of mode, which people love because of the authenticity of it. And I think he's found in Alexander Ocasio-Cortez a perfect generational inheritor, someone who has a very unique and very authentic seeming, feeling, being way of communicating on the campaign trail. The fact that they are doing what they're doing, and they're doing it now, and they have the national platform, they have the national profile. There are a lot of Democrats who are out trying to do the same work, and I don't want to forget that there are congressmen and senators all over the place. But these two, because of the kind of following they have combined, means that they can go to Folsom and Bakersfield and Salt Lake City and turn out these really large crowds of people who are desperate to hear this kind of message, and the message that they are honing in on right now, which is to tie together the story of Kilmar Abrego Garcia to the stories of a lot of other people who are being disappeared and put in detention centers for nothing but exercising their free speech rights. That is resonating like crazy right now. I think not just with the Democratic base, but with a lot of Americans who are starting to get nervous about the prospect that they could be next.
I mean, Derek, the other piece that they lay over isn't just the economic anxiety and the things that you and your co-author write about, but it is the corruption. And that seems to have deep resonance across party lines.
Yeah, I think it's really important to point out not just the people who are showing up to these Sanders AOC meetings, but also the fact that they're showing up and that other Democrats are trying to show up. And you juxtapose that to a theory of politics that was in sway between 2020 and 2024 when Joe Biden was president. And he wasn't going out to talk to people, and he wasn't interested in appearing in the Super Bowl interviews that would have garnered, 50 million views. There was this period, I think, when Democrats were sort of hiding behind the curtain and hoping that no one would ask them tough questions. It's been really inspiring, I think, to see how many people are embracing the opposite of that message. And only with Bernie and AOC going to city after city, small and big around the country, with Cory Booker talking for 25 hours, you've got Pete Buttigieg on a speaking tour and podcast. So whether you're like watching TV, watching C-SPAN, you're living in Central Coast, California, you're listening to podcasts, you're seeing Democrats turn up over and over and over again, making the case that rich oligarchs in this country need to care more about income inequality, that this president doesn't care about constitutional order, and he is just running a wrecking ball through the American system. I think, again, what's really inspiring and important here is not just the people who are showing up to these meetings, and they really matter, but the fact that Democrats have so clearly rejected this idea from the last 4 years that the best way to do politics is to kind of hide and slurp back into the background. They're taking authority right now, and I think they're going to be rewarded for it in 2026 and 2028.
It's so interesting. And Chris Murphy is like a one-man rapid response operation. You want the Democratic response to anything that has happened, you can check his social media feed, and he has responded almost in real time to anything that's happened. It's such a good point. I want to bring Mara in. I want to listen to some Bernie Sanders. I have to sneak in a quick break first. We'll all be right back.
Trains that use the power of Dell AI and Intel, clearing the way so you arrive exactly where you belong.
Every breath you take, every move you make, every day you wake, make no mistake, we'll be helping you. Every breath you take.
I used to leave urine when I coughed, laughed, or exercised. I couldn't even enjoy playing with my kids.
I leaked too. I just assumed it was normal.
Then we learned about Vulcamid, an FDA-approved non-drug solution for our condition.
It really works, and it lasts for years. It's been the best thing we've done for our family.
Things like going to El Salvador, I commend Senator Van Hollen for doing it, but I think there's a case for more. Democrats should have someone on the ground in El Salvador every day until Kilmar Abrego Garcia is sent home. Things that are more disruptive, things that are different from the way that the Democratic Party has practiced politics, including just big rallies. They have to start thinking about things differently because we are in a very different mode. Cory Booker was an example of someone who did something different, and I think that kind of creativity is necessary in a moment like this where the old tactics and the old strategies that have not served the party particularly well recently, they need to be abandoned in favor of something new and more disruptive and more guerrilla style than what we're used to.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mood, right? The voters' appetite for disruption really does cross party lines. Thank you, my friend, Tom Heilman, Mara Gay, and our thanks to Derek Thompson. A quick break for us, what Trump has in store for those law firms who willingly capitulated to him. The next hour of Deadline White House starts after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.
Trains that use the power of Dell AI and Intel, clearing the way so you arrive exactly where you belong.
Explore the world the Viking way, from the quiet comfort of elegant small ships, with no children and no casinos. We actually have reinvented ocean voyages, designing all-inclusive experiences for the thinking person. Viking, voted world's best by both Travel and Leisure and Condé Nast Traveler. Learn more at Viking.com.
It ain't my dad's razor, Dad. Hey, watch it. It's from Gillette Labs. This green bar releases trapped hairs from my face. Game changer. Well, it flex this contours to it, so the 5 blades can get virtually every hair in one stroke for the ultimate Gillette shaving experience. The best a man can get is Gillette Labs.
Artificial intelligence is vital to America's economic future. We must lead in developing AI, including open and closed source models. As the global leader in AI, America can strengthen small businesses, create new jobs, and spread our tech innovations across the globe. But if Washington ties the hands of America's innovators, China will gain a global economic advantage. America must lead. America must innovate. America must win. Our leaders must protect our competitive edge.
I don't want to ding on my good credit, so I'm using Experian to find cards with no ding decline. See these? They say no ding decline, which means if I get denied, my FICO score won't get a ding. Sounds good to me. Get the free Experian app now.
Trains. Trains that use the power of Dell AI and Intel, clearing the way so you arrive exactly where you belong.
Custom Ink helps us motivate our students with custom gear. We love how Custom Ink takes care of everything we need so we can focus on the kids.
We make it easy to wow all your groups with high-quality custom apparel, accessories, and promo products, all backed by our guarantee at customink.com.
You've got a subscription to movie and maybe even one for food. But what about when it's your water line that's streaming? Repairs are expensive. Good contractors hard to find. The plan from HomeServe is like a subscription for peace of mind. For one small monthly fee, when a covered system breaks, we'll send a qualified contractor and pay for the repair. Why worry? Get HomeServe and chill.
Plans from HomeServe start at just $4.99 a month.
Call 1-833-735-4495 or visit homeserve.com.
Do I know the way? What do I know? I know that everything is connected.
We have excellent lawyers, excellent. Have you noticed that lots of law firms have been signing up with Trump? $100 million, another $100 million for damages that they've done. What the hell? They give me a lot of money considering they've done nothing wrong. And we'll use some of those people, some of those great firms. They are great firms too. They just had a bad moment. But we're going to use some of those firms to work with you on your leasing and your other things. And they'll do a great job. I think they're going to do a fantastic job.
Hi again, everybody. It's 5 o'clock in New York. It is a classic children's story. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want some milk to go with it. And when it comes to Donald Trump and law firms, if you give him just a little tiny inch of appeasement, he's never going to stop there, ever. That is the situation right now with several of the world's most prominent law firms who willingly walked into the Oval Office and made deals with Donald Trump in recent weeks. Each one of those firms proactively agreeing to fork over millions of dollars in pro bono work in order to evade punishment in the form of an executive order against their firms. There is brand new reporting in the New York Times today that finds this, quote, Trump, it turns out, has a far more expansive view of what those firms can be called on to do. Over the last week, Trump has suggested that the firms will be drafted into helping him negotiate trade deals. He has mused about having them help with his goal of reviving the coal industry, and he has hinted that he sees the promises of nearly $1 billion in pro bono legal services that he has extracted from the elite law firms, including Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Wharton, and Garrison, Skadden and Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom, and Wilkie, Farr, and Gallagher as a legal war chest to be used as he, Donald Trump, wishes, end quote. So predictable, you're tempted to laugh, right? These firms thought they were avoiding future conflict through appeasement. When in the history of humans has that ever been the case? They thought that by making Trump happy on the front end, they could go about their business on the back end forever. But as the Times reports out today, quote, the emerging gap between what the firms initially thought they agreed to and what Trump says they can be used for shows how the deals did little to insulate them from his whims. Further demands on the firms from Trump could raise the potential for conflicts with paying clients and could further fuel internal dissension. Meanwhile, there are firms that did not take this route, that chose not to cave to Trump's demands. Wilmer Hale, Jenner and Block, and Perkins Coie, when they fought against the Trump administration's revenge orders. Judges have all ruled in their favor, temporarily pausing the executive orders the administration placed on those firms. And yesterday there was another judge ruled in favor of the firms standing up to Trump and fighting the executive orders. Separate reporting in the Times finds this, quote, a federal judge on Tuesday blocked President Trump from punishing the law firm Sussman Godfrey, calling the retribution campaign he has waged from the White House against the nation's top firms, quote, a shocking abuse of power. Donald Trump's escalating war on law firms is where we begin the hour with New York Times investigative reporter, MSNBC national security contributor Mike Schmidt, whose byline is on that first piece of Times reporting we read from. Also joining us is voting rights attorney, founder of Democracy Docket, our friend Mark Elias, and former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Department of Justice, now an MSNBC legal analyst, Mary McCord is here. Mike, take us through what you and your colleagues are reporting.
So if you're following the law firm story like we are, at the beginning of last week, it looked like it might be sort of petering out. There were more deals that were happening. They were happening with firms that...
Petering out on which end?
Well,
more EOs or more deals?
It just seemed like the momentum of the story was sort of slowing down. There were more deals that were happening. They were happening with firms, some firms that I had never heard about. It looked like it was going to continue, but sort of any jarring developments in the story didn't seem like they were. But what happens by the middle of last week is that comment after comment Trump was making, and then that Peter Navarro made, shows that the White House's understanding of the deals is far more expansive than what the firms thought they were getting themselves into. Because if you go back and you look at how the firms got themselves into this situation, how does someone like Brad Carr, the head of Possum, get himself to make this deal? They believe that they're just committing to doing pro bono legal work on issues that they're already working on. It's not a big deal. They're not capitulating to Trump because what they're doing in their own minds is just, we already do stuff for Veterans Affairs. We already do stuff to fight anti-Semitism. So committing this money to Trump to do this pro bono legal work, we're not really giving anything up. This is actually a good deal for us. But what you start to see in Trump's comments last week, and then which backed up by our reporting about what's going on inside the White House, is that they think that this pro bono legal work can be used in a lot of different ways. And in ways to potentially help Trump himself, in ways to go out and do tariff negotiations. And what happens is that this is what could really happen, is that, Boris Epstein or someone in the White House, guys, we want you to do this work, and that would put the firms in an even more difficult position. They thought that they got themselves out of Dodge by making these deals, by going ahead and committing this amount of money and having Trump put out these Truth Social posts and not having to be hit with these executive orders. But they could now find themselves in a position of having to say
Constitution. I mean, why not, if you're right now sort of on the fence, look at the path of appeasement and I don't even, I mean, first answer if that's even legal. Would it going to move into DOJ or the Department of Commerce and work for the government for free? I don't, you know, when I worked there, Richard Painter wouldn't let anyone buy me a soda, but maybe now fancy lawyers are going to work inside the government. But on the other, isn't the path of resistance looking pretty legally sound?
So this is what has flummoxed me since this all started. Not only, Nicole, are you right that in every single legal challenge, the judges have ruled in favor of the law firm challenging these blacklisting executive orders. And this is 4 different judges, some appointed by Democrats, some appointed by Republicans. So this is a nonpartisan issue. But these judges have actually done this in like a nanosecond in the legal world. Challenge gets filed, hearing is like that day or the next day, ruling comes the same day as the hearing. That is how cut and dried it is for the judges that these agreements violate constitutional rights. First Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment due process rights, Sixth Amendment rights to legal representation. I mean, it's so blatant. And as Judge Leon said in enjoining the executive order against Wilmer Hale, is blatantly retaliatory on its face because they're saying the quiet part out loud. He's saying why he's targeting these firms. So it is unfathomable to me why you would reject the notion of litigating, which is what lawyers do. And I understand that some of the firms that have capitulated are primarily transactional firms where litigation is less of their practice, and maybe that corporate transactional work and deals that sometimes require government approval, etc., are things that have been motivating them. But why you would give up fighting for your rights and instead put yourself on a choke chain. I mean, I've called these other firms, they're like the Eric Adams of law firms. You know, at any point, the government can come back, Donald Trump can come back to these firms and saying, you didn't do what you told me you were going to do. You didn't do the pro bono representation that you promised. I don't like the way you changed your hiring practice. I don't like this. I don't like that. And I will also say, to your point about, is this even legal? You know, I'm not sure Donald Trump understands this provision of pro bono services the way that the law firms at least are saying they understand it. Like you, or maybe it was Mike who said, they're thinking, well, maybe I already do some work for veterans pro bono. We'll keep doing that. Donald Trump is saying things that makes it sound like these lawyers are going to do what you said, come and like basically work on behalf of the U.S. government. That would violate law. The law does not permit the government to take volunteer pro bono services. So if they want to sort of in parallel work on causes that the president happens to also feel are valid causes, that's one thing. But to take assignments from the president that benefit, that are taking positions that are designed to benefit the U.S., that's a very different thing. I'd also add that in promising things of value, pro bono services, and the price keeps going up, right? It started at 40 million, it's now at 125 million. Promising those things of value in return for an official act at least gives an appearance of violating federal anti-bribery law. Now, I don't think these firms have that criminal intent, and I'm not trying to point the finger quite that way, but it sure doesn't smell good.
Like, is it possible that Trump thinks pro bono means free to Trump, and the firms think pro bono means philanthropic?
Yeah, totally.
I mean, I know your first report about Paul Weiss has Mr. Karp in the Oval Office. I mean, was anyone translating?
No, Brad Karp went into the Oval Office by himself and found himself with Boris Epstein and other White House officials and Trump essentially by himself, negotiating his firm's future. But the thing about the firms is that they were so scared. They were so scared of being labeled persona non grata. That's Brad Karp's own words describing about if they did this. And this is why
if they fought.
I find it so fascinating, because the firms knew that the executive orders were likely illegal, and they knew that they were undemocratic. And even though they knew that, and even though people like Brad Karp had been part of the Democratic legal establishment that tried to hold Trump accountable the first time and tried to get Kamala Harris elected and tried to help Joe Biden, they were so afraid of even going into court to fight it because of the ramifications it could have on their corporate law business that they didn't do it. And to me, it's the thing that I keep coming back to in the story, which just sort of fascinates me. It fascinates me that these people who held themselves out as being so anti-Trump, in the face of this, so scared that they went ahead and made these deals. And at the end of the day, they were able to get to the deals in their own minds and internally because they weren't committing a lot. They were just committing to doing what they were already doing. These are non-controversial causes. We've already been helping veterans. We already believe in fairness in the justice system. Of course.
Does Donald Trump ever say in the Oval Office, I want you to help veterans? Or does Donald Trump say you're going to do pro bono work for me?
We don't know. All we know is in the Truth Social post. And that's the other remarkable part about this. We don't know every document that exists in these legal deals. But as far as we can tell, there's no like notarized signed contract in which they have gone through all of the details of this and say, look, if you have a disagreement about that, we would go to arbitration or we would do such. There is none of that. But if you had gone to court to fight, like the firms that did go to court to fight, you would have an injunction from a judge. You would have a restraining order from a judge. That gives you a backstop that says, no, this doesn't exist anymore. So if you're one of the 4 firms that fought, and they all got these restraining orders pretty quickly, then you have a backstop. But these firms do not. Those that made the deals with Trump do not have a backstop. He could take the executive order out of his desk right now and re-sign it,